then just an example of something we did on the A2J software app.
But what is the example is what we're talking about?
Yeah.
How much time is spent on the example?
I go on the code, I wouldn't say deep in the weeds, but I get in there and talk about properties and values and things like that. Show some testing, how to write tests.
Okay. How about interfacing functionality with that sort of thing? Is it sort of the product engineering that takes those knowledge?
And there's a little bit of design we talk about, but
It's A2J authoring the CALI app, and software for pro se litigants who don't have lawyers, help them fill out court forms. Yeah. Okay. Well, that's how we have the app. We developed it in-house at CALI, and then how when we did a version change, we needed to bring in Bitovi's help to do some programming for us, and how we work together to make the app better. So that's what we'll be talking about.
and there's a lot of demo in the app, so you'll see a little bit of that too.
Sure. We can talk about that a little bit too. Okay.
Yeah, 2 to 4 more minutes.
Okay.
Seriously, people kind of start wandering after lunch.
So are you guys doing the training also together?
Tomorrow morning.
We are.
That's what I thought.
Yeah.
Talking about with a couple people who are interested
For the training?
for the training, not for like 3 hours of it, but they might
It's only
for a
2
half hour.
It's 2 hours.
Oh, it's 2 hours.
It carries over 2-hour-long sessions. And there's like a half an hour break in the middle.
And who's Sam?
Sam is the one who wrote the original code for it.
Oh, very cool.
You wrote the Flash version.
Oh.
Are you a developer as well?
I'm a generalist.
I like that.
I have written code before,
Yeah.
but I do a lot of other things too.
What's the saying? The jack of all trades, master of none, but nobody ever finishes it. It says, the rest of the code, which is better than a master of one. Like usually it gets used as sort of a negative thing.
Yeah.
Like, oh, that guy's just a jack of all trades. He has no specialty. But the full quote actually says it's better than a master of one. So.
Well, who was the quote from?
That's a good question. I don't have that.
That's really fantastic. I
Yeah.
never knew there was another part to that.
I think I was on Snopes one day, or I was doing something, and I just started like seeking out all the quotes that people use all the time to see if they were legit or what they really meant.
So you fell down the rabbit hole.
It was a pretty big quote rabbit hole that I went into. Yeah.
Who first said down that rabbit hole?
Alice in Wonderland. Lewis Carroll.
Who's quote that?
Lewis Carroll from Alice in Wonderland. She fell down the rabbit hole.
That's how you get down further down the rabbit hole. What else did Lewis Carroll?
Right.
Before you know it, it's 3 hours later and you're
And you know all about Queen Victoria's relatives.
Yeah.
Well, Abraham Lincoln said you shouldn't believe everything you read on the internet.
Yeah. I thought that was Gandhi.
I think he was talking to Abraham Lincoln.
Oh, right.
Well, yeah, that's right.
Now, it was before or after the Civil War where Andrew Jackson was mad.
That's right. Yes.
What did you get? That's good. Is that like a tea?
Skinny vanilla latte ice. Never got it ice before, but it's 140 degrees outside. So.
Yeah, it's pretty warm. Yeah, it's not bad.
The phrase for the conference is it's dry.
Yeah.
It's 10,000 degrees.
Yeah.
It's dry.
I was texting somebody, she's like, how is it? And I was like, well, it's like living in an oven. Oh, like,
It's pretty hot, yeah.
So the Reusable Code is that the whole trades? Master of none is second later is my component negative, and the better art is not in the Wikipedia article about it, but a few other websites do mention it.
That is long. Does it give credit to somebody or is it just some phrase that came up and like did anybody write it down somewhere or is it being quoted?
The etymology goes back far enough that people don't know, but it's just for
okay.
executable traits, master of none, derogatory, though all times better than master of one part. Certainly appears on web pages, but without proper etymology.
Huh. So maybe it's a twist. The internet corrected something.
Yep.
That
The original quote was by Jill.
Right.
Who was mad at Jack
Yeah.
for not being able to fix the house. And then they just-
John, anything we should wait another minute or?
No, go.
Okay.
I can go in the hall.
I already looked. They're all next door.
Okay.
Turning one.
Okay.
Okay.
Everything in.
Oh yeah. Do we,
Posterity?
yeah,
Okay.
for the recording.
Yep.
Okay.
Great. I'm going to switch sides with you and let you do your thing.
Okay. Well, thank you all who are here for attending. I'm Jessica Frank. I'm the Content Development Coordinator for CALI. And one of my main projects is managing our A2J author software. With me today is Mike Mitchell. He's
Hello.
a developer with Bitovi. And we're going to talk a little bit about how CALI worked with Bitovi to reinvent A2J author. Good. Okay, so how did CALI get involved with A2J author and access to justice at all? So you know that CALI has been on the forefront of legal education technology, but in 2004 we partnered with Chicago-Kent Law School to address an issue of great proportion in our country. So multiple studies have found that over 80% of the legal needs of poor people are going unmet every year. These poor people are forced by the lack of legal aid attorneys, because legal aid is underfunded across our country, to represent themselves. And the biggest hurdle that they face is having to handle the court documents themselves. So court forms are made by lawyers for lawyers. They contain a lot of Latin, legalese, they're complicated, they don't explain what certain questions are asking for. And so CALI had an approach to help address that. So, oh, that's weird. The screenshot's not on the screen. Okay, well, it's all right. We have another one, but
Go forward one more.
No?
it's fine. This is A2J Author version 4, and I can show you A2J 6, our new version, in a minute. This A2J Author has been transforming ugly court forms. That last slide was just a 1040 easy, a tax form. Even easy is not easy to handle. So what A2J Author does is take complicated forms and break them up into smaller segments. So one question at a time. There's lots of white space, so this goes into the user design questions that you were asking for. We did studies that found people need a lot of clean space. They like the two avatars. The avatars can't look too person-like, though. We did studies where if it was people's faces, they got freaked out. The users were freaked out, but it needs to have some seriousness, so it can't just be clippy or a teddy bear or that kind of thing. A2J also has a pathway to the courthouse, so it shows progression. It helps people understand how much further they have to go to finish the interview. And I can show you in a few minutes how we have what are called learn mores. We have just-in-time learning that allows authors, the legal aid attorneys and the court staff, or the law students who make these, to add in video, audio, graphics, foreign languages that can help the end user who isn't an attorney to understand the legal matters. So A2J has been wildly successful. Version 4, which I just showed you, has been used almost 4 million times since 2005. We have over 2 million documents that have been generated. There are 1,100 A2J guided interviews live in the world, and they are in 42 states and counting. We're working with a couple of these right now to bump that up. We're also in Ontario, Quebec, New South Wales, Australia, which is where Sydney is, Guam, Puerto Rico, and the U.S. Virgin Islands. However, in 2001, the world was changing. And so this is kind of where our story, our connection with Bitovi starts. So we had over a decade of success with A2J Author, but the world was changing. The iPhone was introduced, not in 2011, but the iPhone was very popular. Flash started becoming deprecated across the web, which is an even bigger problem today in 2017 than it was then. And everybody had a smartphone. I literally Googled, everyone has a smartphone, and they had a picture of people from all over the world attached to their cell phones. So the issue was A2J 4 was built in Flash. Flash doesn't work on an iPhone, and we needed a viewer, a player for the end user. Hi, come on in. that would work on a mobile device so that the user, the pro se litigant, can consume it on their device and then where they were. There was a Pew study, Pew did a study in probably like 2013, something like that, that said that 60% of poor people who meet the poverty guidelines set by the US only have access to the internet via their smartphone. So they don't have home computers that they can easily access. They either have to go to the library, to a courthouse kiosk, or they can access this thing that's already in their pocket to help them get the assistance they need. This is an example of the mobile viewer that Bitovi helped us to develop. So you can see that unlike A2J, 4 doesn't have the avatars, but it still has the clean space. It's one question at a time. This is an example of a pop-up with a graphic. I used last year's CALIcon graphic. But so you can see that people, as they're going along, this is the most amount of information you're going to get on one mobile screen. Excuse me. And the other missing piece that we needed Bitovi's help with was that we needed to add our own back-end document assembly engine. So A2J Author was built as a front-end interface for another software tool called HotDocs. 2004, the Legal Services Corporation, who funds a lot of A2J and a lot of technology projects through their TIG, Technology Initiative Grants, they decided that legal aid organizations across the country should use HotDocs as a back end, but it wasn't as user-friendly for pro se litigants, and so A2J Author was funded to be that front end. However, other software tools are not free. A2J Author is free for any CALI member law schools, any nonprofit, any court, any government entity for non-commercial purposes. We also now, thanks to Bitovi's help, are completely web-based. So you don't need a PC to use the software. And as 3 of the 4 computers in here show, Macs. Law students use Macs. New attorneys use Macs. And so we needed our software tool to be able to run natively on a Mac. Before, with A2J 4, you had to download and run it. It was a Flash-based product, so you had to run it in a Windows machine. HotDocs also only runs in Windows-based machines. And so we turned to Bitovi, too, to help us generate our own back-end document assembly tool. We call that the DAT, the Doc Assembly Tool. So we'll talk a little bit about that in a second. But so why do we pick Bitovi? Bitovi has an open source business model that syncs with CALI's ideals. So we do a lot of making things and giving them away for free. So does Bitovi. They follow some really great best practices in terms of testing, modularizing, documentation, making the code so that it's easily used in the future and updated. It's not a lot of, doesn't require a lot of work to make it easier for maintenance and changes. They're based in Chicago. They're based in the US. So Mike doesn't work in Chicago. However, we'll talk about how we collaborate like that. But their main hub is Chicago, which is where CALI is based. They have expertise that ranges from design to actual JavaScript programmers to quality assurance, and we've used the full spectrum of their services. And they also created their own framework, which Mike will talk about. So it's good to work with the people who develop the tool that you want to use. And I will turn it over to Mike then.
Great. Thank you. So again, yes, my name is Mike Mitchell. I'm a JavaScript developer with Bitovi and now a conference presenter. Thanks, John. So I'm going to tell you just a little bit about Bitovi, and then I'll go into, let me get my slide up here. We're a JavaScript consulting company that's been developing apps for 10 years for companies like Lowe's, Walmart, Nokia, CALI, of course. And we've created our own open source framework to do that. That's called Done.js. That's kind of an umbrella of many packages that come together to make that open source framework. Excuse me. So, and what sets us apart is because we build the tools that our clients use and that we use day in and day out, there's no black box. We can get in there and fix anything in the background. We can fix bugs very quickly. We're not relying on a third-party tool set to do that. So she mentioned why they chose Bitovi. I'm going to talk about why CALI, what makes CALI a good partner for us. A problem that we discovered and how Jessica and I worked together to address that problem, the steps we went through, which include design, code, testing, I'll show a live demo of that new feature working. And then again, as she mentioned, we'll talk at the end about tools that you can find very helpful in a remote situation if you're not in the same office or even in the same state. Oop. Missed my slide. So why CALI? The biggest indicator of success we've found really when working with clients is if someone at the client has a vision. They know the roadmap. They know where they're going. They know the steps they're going to want to take to get there and the time frame and the costs and things associated with that. And CALI, and especially John and Sam, they started A2J as sort of a side project initially, and it's grown into its own full-fledged app. And they've always kept us on track. They've always had the vision. So anytime there's a question about where are we going, what should we prioritize, we can just reach up to them, and they keep us all on track. The second thing, which is sort of obvious, but bears repeating always, is communication. Especially with us being remote, we're constantly talking over disparate tools. We're not in the same room. We have to elevate the communication and make sure that we're talking to each other, not only like in a certain quantity, but also being specific about what we're looking to say and what we're asking for. Sometimes that flat text-based communication can make things easy to confuse, and so making sure that you focus and are thoughtful in your communication is really important. CALI does an awesome job of that. But the biggest thing, especially for me, since I'm on CALI day and night and sometimes weekends, but is the we attitude. I very much feel like as a client-customer relationship that I've never felt like it's us versus them. It's always we. How are we going to address an issue? What's the next feature that we think we should prioritize? What's the best tool for that thing? And that, for me, goes a long way to make the day in and day out just an amazing work experience with CALI. So here I'm going to have Jessica explain. The problem we discovered was with nested loops. They worked a certain way in the old A2J 4 Flash version, and then in A2J 6 they were not working exactly the same way. And I'm going to have Jessica help explain the legalese side of it, and then I'll come back to the code.
That's our partnership. I'm the lawyer side, but he's the programmer side.
Thank you.
So I won't be explaining the code. You know, you're welcome. So the issue that we're going to use as our hypothetical here involves nested loops, loops in themselves. So I'll give you a real-life example in a court form where it would work. So in a divorce, you're going to need to have fill out information for child custody if you have children. The court wants to know the children's names, their birth date, the same kind of information about each child that you may have. That's one loop. They also are going to want to know about all the addresses those children have lived at. And child A may have lived at address 123. Child B didn't necessarily live all the time in those same houses. So you have to have the outer loop, which is the children, their names, their biographical information. And you have the inner loop, which is unique to each child that are the addresses that they've lived at in the past 5 years. Very common in divorce forms. And the issue arose that A2J 4 did not natively support this nested repeat loops. And so there was a developer in our legal aid community, Bob, who did a lot of work for Illinois and Michigan and New York, which are our power users of A2J. He developed a hack for our system, for A2J 4, that allowed it to basically capture that information and in Hot Docs to parse it out so that the appropriate addresses for child 1 went with them, child 2 had their appropriate addresses. So the issue arose when we're working on converting all the 4s to the 6, which is our new version now, that Bitovi helped us write. It didn't work the same way. And this hack is ingrained pretty heavily into our community. It's an advanced authoring feature. But for those big divorce packets, these guided interviews that fill out 40 or 60 forms that somebody might need, it's a big problem if how they had done it in 4 is going to take an enormous amount of time to convert. So we wanted to make it as easy as possible for our authors, these legal aid attorneys, court staff, law students, to convert their existing ones into our new platform so that they could benefit from the mobile responsive viewer and all our new features. So I came to Mike and I said probably something like, oh, this doesn't work right, oh, WTF. And so then we had to parse out what it meant to be a nested loop in code, what it needed to do in A2J, just in general, and then what it had to do for the end users and the authors. So that's where we split up kind of our expertise. I handle a lot of author interaction all the time. I'm always talking to these people, and I have to explain how software works to people who aren't programmers. So almost none of our developers of guided interviews are programmers. They are people who are good at Excel. They might have been the IT person at their legal aid. They were a law student, for example, Will, who picked it up from a class they took, but nobody is really a JavaScript programmer or anything like that. And so we have to translate a lot of what people expect, lawyers expect, into code, and that's where Mike and I work together.
Thanks. And so then Jessica comes to me and explains the legal side and the user story side so that I can apply it to code. And when we started talking about nested loops, the first thing I thought of, and this might be dating myself a little bit, was being a 13-year-old and going into whatever store had a Commodore 64 and writing in 10, Mike is cool, 20, go to 10, which is really like an endless loop. It's not a nested loop, but and then I had to just go hunt down the font and bring it up here. But
he had to explain this story.
This is a little before her time. So here's really, in a diagram form, once we talked, what I felt like the nested loop represented. Sometimes in code, you will do loops that test before you do anything. In this case, A2J tends to work where you'll start in a loop and you'll initialize it, but basically with a counter, usually to 1. And then it'll go through some set of pages before it actually does a test. Maybe the counter hasn't reached a certain thing, or a certain value hasn't been changed, set to true or false. Then once it reaches the test, if it's true, it'll go back, add to the counter, go through all those pages all over again, and just keep going until that false condition happens. Either you hit a certain count, or the user themselves just clicks no. And so to integrate the nested loop, now we just need basically that same thing inside. So you come down the page, you put in the name, like she said in her example, for the child, and then when you get to address, if there is one, now we're initializing an inner loop and kind of doing that same thing. Doing some steps, maybe putting in addresses, doing a test. If it keeps going through, we just keep incrementing that counter. There's a little bit of interesting code here, and I'll explain why that still exists, where it's taken the outer count, it's multiplying it by 10, and then adding 1 to it. That has to do with document assembly at the end and some things that, kind of some hard choices we had to talk about and make. So we started with design. Rather than getting on a keyboard and just slinging some code, which is like a natural thing to do, we looked at our current design, which was this. This is how you designate a page that is part of a regular loop. You just assign a counting variable to it, and then it will track those answers, so you can have multiple answers in that loop. We talked through how it works currently, how we might want it to work in the next version, and we came up with these 5 goals. So the first is that it should just be easier to make nested loops and use them. That one seemed pretty obvious. Bob's hack, while it worked, it was all in A2J scripting language, so it was difficult to explain to people, it was difficult to troubleshoot, and sometimes you could just, even in your own document, you could forget how you made things work and how you set up the counts. The second thing is that it should be simple to upgrade the current loops. So people are using this already. If we go too far afield from the way it's working right now, then that makes it difficult for people to upgrade and use the new integrated nested loops. It should also be a step towards multiple nested loops. We talked about the possibility, now we have 2 levels, maybe at some point it should support 3 or 4, so we should keep that in mind when we're making the solution. It should not require a massive rewrite, so we didn't want to take a lot of time tearing down a bunch of code, possibly breaking other things in order to get this functionality in, but we did want to add it at that time, so we wanted to make sure that we could kind of blend those 2 needs. And then finally, the most important maybe, is to make it easier to document and train. So other people can use it. It's easier to explain to them how it's going to work and how they should implement it, instead of having to kind of reinvent the wheel with Bob's solution every time. And so you can see this is not much difference than the original. It really just adds a second variable that's for the outer counting variable. And as part of that discussion, we went through a few iterations. We decided that because this was sort of a relatively advanced technique, that we would add a nested check mark so that in the normal mode when people are using and creating interviews, they would just skip that and just kind of make a single loop like they expect. But if they knew they needed that extra functionality, then they could check mark the box and get access to it. So go ahead.
So that's one of the design features. The idea behind A2J on the user interface is not to give people information before they need it. That's the whole point of taking it, making a lot of clean space, and only introducing legal definitions or extra help at the point in which they need it. So the whole point is not to throw everything at them at once. So the same kind of design principles went into how we did this. We don't want to throw everything that's possible in A2J to our authors at once. We only want to give it to people when they need it. And so that's when they can check the checkbox if they need it.
Right. And I should have mentioned that this is the author side of A2J. This is the design side. So, okay, then this decision then led to some code. This is a function that actually sets the visited pages. When you first, as a user, go to a new page, it goes through some logic to set a list of pages that you visited that's used for navigation and other things later. I'm just going to focus on the part that, oh, I moved my mouse. There we go. That I added for the outer loop bit. So, and this was for some, if you're not into code, this might be a little bit in the weeds, but I'm going to try to make it as straightforward as possible. What we're doing here is we're checking on the page itself whether it has an outer loop var, a variable associated with an outer loop. If it does, we're going to capture that and assign it here. And then if we have one of those, we want to capture the value of that outer loop var. So now we're talking about properties and values together. And my analogy that I came up with was you're at a vending machine and you want a candy bar or chips or something. You can think of the button as the property. That's something that is like a placeholder for the actual thing you're going to get. And the value is the actual candy bar. In my case, it's got to be Reese's Peanut Butter Cups.
Hell yeah.
So if you have a property and you use it to get the value, you're going to press the button, and hopefully that Reese's Peanut Butter Cup falls down, you get your value, everybody's happy. If you press the Reese's Peanut Butter Cup button and you don't get it, well, maybe that's a bug, right? That's analogous to a bug. So maybe I hit the wrong button, maybe I didn't put enough money in, or maybe the code's bad, maybe the buttons are misassigned, and that's an indicator of to go back and see what's going on in your code. We'll talk about testing in just a minute to show how that works out. So does that make sense for everybody, that if you have a property with a name, when I ask for its value, I'm going to get the actual thing that I need? Okay. So back here. So once we have these values, then we know we have an outer loop going on, and we can start using it and storing those values and then asking for them later when we need them. That's important. That's part of what the main issue was, is that when you were using a nested loop, it was working, but it wasn't tracking the inner and outer relationship. And so that's what we had to set up. So if you use things, a lot of times they use things to do ordinals, for instance, like the first child or the second child. You had to know about that outer child to be able to use that kind of information. So ideally in a code world, you would write a test first. Test-driven development. It's hard to do in a practical sense, but and you would want that test to break. So if you write it first, there's no code to support it, of course it's going to break. That's the easy way to do it. In practicality, sometimes you have to mock some code up. You have to get things down there and see like a demo page before you can think, okay, yeah, this is really how I'm going to do it. But you should still go back and write a test. And so we're going to look at just some of the steps of writing a simple test for that same code I just showed you. Here I have an interview, which is actually a collection of pages. We're going to take pages, which is a list of pages, and .3 means the fourth page. In code, you count from 0. So 0, 1, 2, 3 is actually the fourth page. And I'm going to set that outer loop var property, like the button on the vending machine, to the word outer, which is like the candy bar. And then the second line is saying, just give me the number 1 and send it back. This is actually a testing third-party package called Sinon that lets you mock what functions return. So if you already are testing that function call, which might be complicated to set up in this test, you can mock it here and just get a value. And you don't have to go through setting up that complicated test that you know you're testing somewhere else already. So that's given me a 1, and then this appstate.adder page is actually setting the page property to the name of that fourth page. That's what pages bracket 3 means. So that's emulating a user going to that page. So now our test is set up. We create what we think we need to test, the property and its value, and we go to that page and we're going to see what happens. So here's the actual test part of that test. The first line is sort of like a sanity check. We should assume that if we visited 3 pages already, and I do that, emulate a user going to that page, then the length of my list should now be 4. So that one just kind of covers the fact that, okay, basics are happening as I expect. The second assertion here is actually saying, in the visited list, 0 is the most recent, just by the way the code is designed. In the visited list, that outer loop var should equal outer. And then also, the value should equal 1. You can notice that it's a string. That's just the way our answer set is stored, is at a string. So when it's used, it's a number, but we do change it to a string when we're going to save answers. So if all of these are perfect, then the test will pass. But your test should not pass the first time, even if you're writing it after the fact of the code. Does anybody know why you should make your test fail the first time?
So that you know your test is working?
So you know your test is working. Exactly, John. So if you don't make sure that it breaks when these values are wrong, then you can't really be confident that it's working when it's passing. You could see fake green check marks going along the page. And so that's what we have here. You can see it's running through my app state test, which is what tests that set visited pages function. And it expects the value of outer to equal laser cats. I was Googling laser cats when I made this, so that's why I picked that as an example. So that would tell me I need to go check my code. Either I need to make sure that I'm sending in the right data, giving it the right input that it expects, or that it's giving me my value back as I expect, or possibly it's just operator error again. But once I fix that, then I should have all green check marks just like this. And that's a beautiful thing to see if you've been working on a hard problem for a while. So here I'm going to show you a live demo. This is my emergency page in case the demo gods are not kind to me of this feature in action. Wrong way. Here we go. So this is actually the A2J app in its current state running on my local machine. And this is an interview that's just started up. I'm going to continue. And it's asking me for a first name for a child. I'll just put in Bill. And then an address for that child. Let's do 321 Code Street. And you can see here I have 2 options. I can either add another address or continue back to the names loop. I just explicitly made those buttons to help with the example. So I'm just going to say 1 address for Bill. It's going to prompt me if there's another name, another child. Say yes. Let's just put in Kim. If I make typos, forgive me, I can't see what I'm doing up there. And so we'll put in 2 addresses for Kim here. And then we'll continue out. And we'll say we're done this time. And there's no more children, there's no more. I'm going to show you, this is an author tool that lets you monitor the state of the interview when you're designing things. So you can see over here we have, Bill has an index of 1. He's the first child, first name. Kim has 2. And with the mathy thing I showed you before, the times 10 plus 1, is what gives us the association. And that's actually an homage to Bob's hack. We kept that because for future design, we weren't sure exactly if we were going to limit to 10 items the way he does, if we were going to allow authors to do infinite, nested, how we were going to do that. So it made sense at this point to keep it this way, especially because the hot docs parsing on the back end, they know how to do this already. How to take this 1 for Bill and know that the 11 address belongs to him and that Kim has 2 because 21 and 22 apply to her number 2. So that's why that's kind of set up that way. Does anybody have any questions about the loop working in this way, or?
So you guys will be limited to 10?
Yeah, right now it's limited to 10 within a given. So if you had a child, they could only have 10 addresses. If it hit 11, I mean, you could, with the math, you could, if you knew that as an author, you could say set the inner counter to 100 times. But then you'd have a lot more parsing and things to do. I don't think it would be impossible. You just have to rewrite the hot docs side. You can correct me on that.
So a lot of core forms limit the number So it was found that most people don't live in more than 10 addresses. So a lot of when they're doing document assembly in legal aid is that they're trying to help the most amount of people possible, but there are still some people who need to have interactions with a lawyer who can't do it themselves. So in these kind of situations, a lot of times they say, if your child has lived in more than 10 homes in the past 5 years, please contact legal aid. Or if you have had, whatever, like if the inner loop gets too big, you can limit the scope of what your document assembly project can handle. So 10 has been found to be pretty.
Yeah, and during our discussion, we decided this was an acceptable hack around the situation. Yeah.
Kind of an aside, but so and in the inner loop, all of those individual addresses have taken a concatenating into a big super addresses field, right?
Yeah, there's like a big answer set that is generated in actually in XML, and it will associate that index with that value, and then that whole XML sheet, the hot docs parser takes that, and same thing like the keys or properties and values, it grabs those and puts them into the template where they need to go.
So as a programmer,
Yes.
Would you have preferred a design that didn't just allow an inner and outer loop, but like allowed the general purpose, any number of loops within loops?
Yeah, I think if we were making it from the start, that probably would have been the way I would have done it, is try to make it just supported, go nested as much as possible and as reusable as possible.
And that's a big discussion we have a lot.
Yeah.
Of like, here's the existing code, and here's the 10 years of people doing it a certain way and expecting it a certain way, particularly people who aren't programmers who now have picked up our program and are A2J developers. And so a lot of it is back and forth with Mike saying, well, what if we did it this way? Would that be okay? And I'm like, well, let me poke around, let me try it, let me lawyer it for a little bit. And we have a lot of like negotiation back and forth.
Yeah.
And it's starting with existing code, so we're not scrapping the whole thing. He's not building it fresh, and so we have to reuse a lot of the stuff that was already there. That is working.
Yeah.
Right, I was planting that question because I wanted to say there's technically technical debt there, right? We're not ready now for the future where somebody comes to us and says, well, what happens when I've got a 4x5 or sort of, a 3 version nested loop thing? We're going to have to go back in and fix that. But the reality is, if you look at court forums or look at most legal situations where you're asking people questions, you almost never run into that. And I mean, I say almost, but like 99.9% of the time. And when you're paying someone to code, and when there's time limits involved, you're always making edge decisions that are return on investment. It's like, yeah, we could be pure and zero out that technical debt, but for God's sake, let's get this project done. And that's what this is about.
And a lot of what we're working against too is a timeline. So Flash is getting killed off, and we're getting, so people have to start getting this converted and get it out there. We get a lot of pushback from the legal aid community saying, I want to use it on phones. I want to use it on phones. When can I use it on the phone? And so a lot of it is we don't want to spend forever making something 100% perfect. We have to have a deliverable product. And then just one of the pushbacks also that I remember when we were working with the initial design of our new, so you'll notice that this is different from A2J4. So our avatar was updated, the screen, all the images were updated, but part of the lawyer inside and the working with legal aid and the history that we brought, Bitovi kept trying to say, well, what about colors, or can we add in, at one point we saw a design that had like grass colored, it was like a really weird green, or why does she have to be there? Why can't it just be like the text box so it looked more mobile? And what about the colors? And so John and I had a lot of pushback on the Bitovi designers who wanted to make it look very slick in Silicon Valley. And so we had to push back and say, no, we've studied this. Like, this interface is our secret sauce. We don't want it to look like every other web app. We want it to look like this. And so that was another negotiation where, they might have preferred to do it a certain way, but we had to put our foot down on that one.
Yeah, I was surprised at how much research and testing was done on the avatars and how they look and how people cared that much about how the avatar looked. Okay, let's go back to the...
One of the parts that we need the avatar.
Isla is her name in Ohio, if you're wondering.
Tends to be sort of nondescript in terms of
racial
nationality.
I'm going to let you drive here, but I'll chime in when you need me to. We're going to talk now about, so we talked just now a little bit actually about us going back and forth on this particular issue and how much communication happens. And this is all from, you know, Texas to Chicago. So we thought we'd finish up with some of the tools that we use.
Yeah, so a big part of this was a learning curve for me, working with an outside developer and having to pick up a lot of these tech tools. So the main one that Mike and I use every day, and these are kind of tips for you guys if you're working with outside developers, we use Slack. And so raise your hand if you don't know what Slack is. Have you never heard of it? Okay. So we use it for, it's Google, it's GChat or AIM or whatever on steroids. We're on it constantly talking about it. It has emojis, so you get that like friendly communication. We play with the emojis a lot. But it's integrated into GitHub. So GitHub is our code repository.
Yes.
Explain that and then how it's integrated.
Sure. So GitHub, for those of you that haven't used it or don't know, it's a place where it allows you to put versions of your code and let it update in a safe manner. You can do pull requests against code that you've changed. People can approve it. They can comment on it back and forth. So from the coding side, it makes a safe environment. And for collaboration especially, if people are working on the same code at the same time, it makes you fix and merge errors or problems that might happen. It keeps you on your toes, and it also lets you roll back to versions if you need to. But especially for us working together, it allows her to assign, you know, put issues in, upload images and anything that might help me, sometimes GIFs that show the problem. I guess it's GIFs, did I say it right? I don't know. And really define what the problem is and also comment on it back and forth. And then she can actually assign things to me, prioritize stuff. We can tag them under certain things if it's an IE-related bug or if it's just a feature we want. So for collaboration, it's fantastic. There's people that actually even use it just to write collaboratively and not just do code. But mostly, I think it's used for version control on code.
It's also great for the project management side of it. So a lot of, like when Mike was describing the pages and the values and that functions and that kind of stuff, that's not my wheelhouse. And so it helps me to see project management, what he's working on, like you said, to assign him issues, to see what changes have been made, a status of a project, or a specific bug that he's working on. I can see that. It also gives the rest of our team, so John or Sam or Elmer or Dan, whoever happens to be looking at this in the Slack channel, we can all see what's going on. We can discuss it. We can have an, hey, at channel, what do you think we should do about this thing? So it's not just Mike and I working on the project. It's the whole CALI team gets to see what the Bitovi team is working on. We also use GoToMeeting for when the flat text of Slack isn't enough, and Slack has just added screen sharing and calls. But we use GoToMeeting a lot, and I use GoToMeeting when I train authors. I train a lot of legal aid attorneys remotely and law students, so it's a great tool for that. We use Screen Hero, even though we have firewall issues in our offices. We get blocked, so that's only really when I'm working remotely. And Google Hangouts, because when we first started working with Bitovi, they like to use Google Hangouts because you all want to look at each other's faces when you're talking to each other, and so we've used that one before. Oh.
Can you talk about what Screen Hero is? I've never heard of it.
Sure.
Sure.
That was interesting.
Yeah. So Screen Hero, and what I love about that is it's a very minimalist collaboration tool. So it's just audio. There's no video. But, and it can be a group of people, I think, though I've only used it one-on-one. It lets you and I control basically the same computer. It's though we're sitting together and pairing on code. So it gives you that screen sharing capability, and you can both move the mouse, you can both type. But it's only doing audio, so you don't have much overhead as far as like video or any other side chat channels or anything like that.
It helps when I'm explaining something to Mike, and I'm like, no, but if you click this button, it doesn't work. And a lot of like, no, but that one, no, that one over there. And instead of just him controlling the mouse, no, just forget it. Let me just show you how it's not working on my computer.
Yeah, I can see her just move as though she's sitting there in front of me and then be like, oh, you didn't mention that you were clicking button B in between those two steps or whatever.
I never forget to mention those things.
She doesn't.
Yeah, so a lot of this is the two of us learning how to work together just as individuals, but a lot of it is changing the way that the CALI staff has worked, and I think a little bit of integrating the way Bitovi does it.
For sure.
We've sort of changed the model a little bit about how we do it. We have pretty much set development, staging, production. I'm been trained a little bit more to give our community better feedback and let them know when things are happening. And so a lot of pushback for us is like, well, when is this happening? Like that now they want to see regularly they get emails with our listserv about what's happening. It's taking this little side project of CALI, and we're really expanding and making it an app that can be used in the world, and that is ready to go. Do you want to talk about the future project? Or you
No, yeah, we can go to the next one.
Okay. So now that we're getting at the end of our presentation, we'll talk a little bit about our future projects that we've been working on, and we'll get to Will's in a second, which is on here. But one of the big things that we are collaborating, these are future collaborations that we're working with Bitovi on. Adding in analytics to the back end of A2J guided interviews. So A2J guided interviews sit on a national server called Law Help Interactive. That's where LSC, Legal Services Corporation, funded legal aids who use our software can host those guided interviews and hot docs templates for free. So the analytics they get from their site is runs and assemblies. That was that chart I showed you. But there's no analytics about what happens inside of a guided interview, because our Flash-based viewer was its own contained package. It wasn't a separate web page. Each page the user went to wasn't a separate thing that Google Analytics could track. So we have a grant this year to add PyWik, which is our PWIC. There's a discussion about what it's called, but I don't like PWIC. To add that capability, which we're currently running on our CALI lessons on our CALI website right now, into A2J authors, so that we can see how long somebody spends on a page, what path they took. So there's 4 million runs, but there's only 2 million documents assembled. We've assumed for the past 12 years that that's okay, because not everybody who starts one finishes it. They didn't qualify, they didn't have the paperwork, they didn't have their husband's social security number when they're filling it out at the library, they had to leave, that kind of thing. But we're assuming it, and we all know what assume means. And analytics are huge now in the legal aid community, and so we are actually at the forefront of adding this capability. But PyWik, open source, you own the data, so Google's not mining the data. We can control what we know and what we don't know. So we don't ever want to be subpoenaed by somebody's abusive ex-husband to say, what did they put on their court forms? We're not going to store any of the answers that the user gives, just the path they travel through a guided interview. The legal aid organizations, when we first were pitching this to them in January at the technology conference, we said, we're not going to collect any information about location. We're not going to know the IP address. And somebody said, well, wait, I want to know what counties are using my form. I want to know where people are using my form. Because they do targeted marketing. So in, for example, New York, they have special interviews that are used just in Bronx County. They want to see which courthouse. You know, if they do an ad that runs on the side of a bus in one area of the state, they want to know if more people go use it in that area of the state. Was it effective? And so it turns out we're going to find the location and then forget that information. So the IP can give you generalized location.
To be clear, we'll find the location, then we'll forget how we found it.
Right.
We'll forget the IP address, so that there's no, we'll de-anonymize, we'll anonymize the location, I guess.
Yeah.
Instantaneously forget it, so we don't have to, yeah.
Yeah.
So part of that is us, the CALI side, telling the Bitovi side where to put those markers. And so we're working with them to build that tool in, and then eventually to build a dashboard so that our authors can go see the 5 interviews they've created. They can see what interviews have done what over time. The other thing we're working on is potentially adding in a chatbot feature. So, not sure how big chatbots are in your world, but in the legal aid and technology world, that's kind of a really niche market, but it's huge. That's like the sexy phrase everyone talks about is chatbots and AI and machine learning, that kind of thing. And so the mobile viewer for A2J already kind of looks like a chatbot. We've already broken up the whole one bit a piece of information at a time, and we just have to work on a way in which we can serve that up to end users over texting with SMS, using Google Home or Alexa if somebody wants to fill out a form that way. So those are other projects we're working with. And a cool one, which we have Will Hawkins here in the audience with us, is a project, A2J. There's millions of forms possible in the world that people could automate. Problem is time and money. And so law students
have tons of time in terms of they're in a semester, they can take a class which teaches them how to use the software. They're already pretty techy for the most part, law students. So we want them to be able to spend the time in a classroom learning how to use the software, automating a document, and then partnering with a legal aid organization to basically give it over to them. So pro bono-esque work inside of a classroom. So we have the A2J author course project we've been running for 5 years now. We've been over 16 or 20 schools, something like that, are teaching some form of A2J in their courses. And one of them was Will's school, University of Northern Kentucky. Is it the official?
NKU.
NKU, okay. And so Will's professor came to me last fall and said, I want to teach a course that involves A2J. And it was really, like, he stopped by my office for an hour. We chatted. I was like, here's some resources. And I taught one of their courses remotely. We did a go-to meeting or something like that where his class, I talked to them about the basics of A2J. If you're interested, I'm doing a session like that tomorrow morning here at the CALI conference. And then they ran with it. And then I got a couple of questions back and forth from his team. And it's really cool because they're the first people in the country to use our back-end document assembly tool for a real project. And so the partnership with Bitovi was Mike wrote instructions on how to host the back end of the document assembly tool. We put it up in a version of GitHub called GitLab, gave Will access to it, and they ran with it. And now there is a live, or soon to be live, guided interview running that produces a court document to help with expungement. And all of that, the instructions and the working back and forth between Mike and Will to kind of sharpen those instructions and make them as easy as possible, that'll all be available in the same, in a GitHub repo. People can go, download it, run with the same license as well.
Yeah, the interesting thing to me about this process was kind of like what Michael was talking about this morning, where you have a single use case, but you can actually create an interview and have the document generated right at the end that just solves one problem. It doesn't have to be like getting a server set up and do this whole thing, make sure your database is rolled out correctly or anything like that. It's really just all hosted, in this case, on Apache. And you're able to have it in just this tiny little package that serves an important community and an underserved community, but it doesn't have to be a big full author thing to make it happen. And I thought that was just really cool to see that actually happen and work for Will and his team. And you guys are spreading that too, right? That's going to maybe another state, like the next year's?
We're going to, not next year, like now.
Oh, now.
Yeah, it's already going to Louisiana.
Today.
Wow.
Not today, but next Saturday.
Oh, wow.
Great. Congrats.
Yeah.
So, I mean, there's a scalable model here. I don't know how many of you have attended those legal hackathons, or you've probably seen them advertised and things like that. I've been to a couple. And they're wonderful events of energy and collaboration, but not creating a finished product. They're usually 2 days, over a weekend or something like that. There's always a difficulty in trying to find whether you can get enough programmers. Usually begging people in the undergrad school to send the programmers over or something like that. The ones that do show up are happy, relatively unskilled, but love learning about new technologies and about a new subject area, law. Oh, it's a decision tree. And I've always thought, if they could start from a tool that already exists that builds their decision tree. Not that I don't like programmers, I am one myself, but you wouldn't need the programmers as much, and you could get so much further. Maybe you can even get to the 90 or 95% completion in a single hackathon, as long as you had the legal expertise. And then there's that much more positive feeling of like, wow, we actually finished an expungement or a short form or something like that.
So those are typically they're writing in Python or something, just code.
No, they're pulling down Bootstrap, hacking it together in Objective-C if it's and therefore only an iPhone app or some other coding language that's usually mobile first, which is smart, but they literally walk the same walk that we have over years. Okay, now we got to include branching. Oh, what do they want to paste a picture in there? Oh, what do they want to? And they're like, okay, they make a long list of things to add later. Get the prototype of the demo working. And don't get me wrong, oh, wonderful, everybody's happy, but not a
Production.
not a production or even close to and I would like to see hackathons become places where you get closer to that production readiness and iterate at a higher level.
We get to be like the old school, oh yeah, we knew that in 2007. Like, oh yeah, we added radio buttons.
I don't want to brag about that. I mean, but I've been in it and I watch them go through the exact same things, but just in an accelerated manner.
And I think one of the interesting things about that was, as we worked with A2J Author throughout the semester, I'm a computer scientist in real life, and I didn't do any of the development for our guided interview. We had someone who he was a programmer, but that wasn't his real job. But he was the one in our class who took it on to do this. And I think in a lot of cases, I heard a lot of grumbling about, at some point I would hear, oh, well, if we had to start again, I would have just rewritten this whole thing in JavaScript myself. And I sort of was like, yeah, you would have, sure, because this really sucks, and because you want to be in it together. But I was actually rolling my eyes because as a computer scientist and someone who developed a system like this and somebody who uses this, they have done this guided interview process that they've put together to build these is very complicated. And it is production ready, and it handles branching, and it handles this, and it handles that. And I thought to myself, you would have tried to rewrite this from scratch, and you would have had exactly that same experience. Oh, we need to do branching, we need to do this, we need to do this. And so what I'm trying to say is I think this is a great tool. I think it's exactly for the reason that you said it, but for others, is to get to that point where, okay, maybe if we wanted to go from 99.99 to 100%, we would need another feature, but you don't. Like, I don't need triply nested loops. I don't need infinitely nested loops. So I think this is a great tool, and please take advantage of Jessica and Mike because they're great. They really are. If you want to use this tool and it doesn't do something you think it should, ask them. Because what I found was 3 out of 4 times it did what I didn't think it did pretty easily. I just didn't know how to do it. And when it didn't, they made it work.
He's made us $20 now.
Yeah. Thanks, Will.
Yeah, our GitHub issue queue is gigantic with ideas and things that we're thinking about and discussing. So we accept all input.
And part of our collaboration, just in terms of the A2J team, independent even of Bitovi, is that this wasn't built. It's not something that just John or Sam came up with. There's a lot of community feedback that we go into. So the legal aid community had a lot of input about, I don't like this here, or this doesn't work for people who have sight problems, or who have trouble hearing, or they've taken our tools and built them, and even Sam sometimes will see existing guided interviews and say, wow, I didn't think it could do that. There's one from Legal Aid of Ontario in Canada that has 400 questions, and when you look at the back end, the branching, I've shown it in Johnson, and we're both like, wow, we didn't expect this little baby tool we did not think it would grow into that or support that.
We didn't think Flash could handle it.
Yeah, and a lot. So, and they've used it in unique ways. So in New York, they generally have English as the main interview, but they have pop-ups that can be in French or Spanish. That's the replica of the text. And so they're sitting in a court help center. They have their person who doesn't speak English natively, who may have trouble reading English. They can have a helper who can read the question in English, but then the person can know what's actually being said in their own language. A2J supports 14 different languages now. And so those 14 languages, we started with English, we added Spanish, then we added French, and we had Mandarin and Korean in A2J 4. But now we have Chaldean, we have Hmong, we have, there's Russian, Dutch. All of those were things that were added because the community asked for it.
Reverse languages?
We have Arabic. No, we have Arabic.
Yeah, but I don't think it does. I don't think it handles the right to left.
It hasn't been hard tested. Yeah. So a lot of the legal aid organizations, we don't Google Translate it for you. You still have to write it in whatever language you want it in. But our software supports those characters, and so a lot of the people who aren't using it because there aren't a lot of people who can write at the legal level in those languages. There's a lot of debate in the community about, do we use Google Translate? Do you have an actual translator? Right. Google Translate, no, for legal stuff. But,
And, well, yeah, you know my situation, Richmond Road, dealing with pre-existing court-prescribed Virginia documents in a very formalistic state where deviation might, be costly. So we're pretty much wed to the hot docs approach. And I'm wondering how much easier would your whole